Alright guys, it's Chatterbox Reviews, coming at you guys with my review for the Twilight Zone Season 1, Episode 6. Alright, so this one is called 6 Degrees of Freedom. An interesting episode. Another long one again. It was one of the longest ones so far. I think the third longest so far. But definitely an interesting episode. To me, this wasn't really a Twilight Zone episode though. And I discussed this in my review last week. About this reboot being not really the Twilight Zone. They're kind of missing these fundamental elements of it. And this episode I felt like was the least like a Twilight Zone episode. To me, this was more of just a really, I would say good sci-fi kind of thriller episode, of course with, a lot of fiction in it. And I also think this is one of, at least for me, maybe outside of the first few, moments in this episode, is one of the only episodes where they haven't had an abundance of social commentary and kind of this, less subtlety, kind of on the nose type of, commentary on certain things, where this one was more of just an immersive sci-fi fiction piece. Now, maybe I just missed out on some of the underlying themes and tones that they were trying to set here, but overall, maybe this is the most enjoyable episode for me so far in the series. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, though, of course, of this episode. What do you think of it? I'm going to talk about the ending, of course, with my recap here, and then I'll get to my overall thoughts, rating, favorite character of the episode. We're going to talk about the ending, but I'd love to hear what you guys thought of the ending and what you got out of it, because finally, I've been begging them to do this, but finally, they gave us an ending that was actually open-ended, without Peele just coming and saying what they were trying to do here. Even his thing was a little vague, so I really like to hear your guys' theories and thoughts on this episode and what you thought of it. If you enjoyed the review, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Would really appreciate it as always. So, let's get into this week's episode of The Twilight Zone. So, this one tells the story of the first man-missioned or human Mars mission, where a group of the best astronauts seek to explore the planet and begin colonizing Mars and the solar system as a whole due to adverse conditions on Earth. So, we get the idea it's not a needed mission at the time, where a lot of these other sci-fi movies, Interstellar comes to mind, right, where they set it up at first that they need to go on this mission because Earth is pretty much uninhabitable, right, and, it's very soon going to be, I believe in that one, it's kind of a dust storm, so none of the crops are able to grow anymore. But this one, it's not needed at this point in time, but it is one that people are more confident in now. And in the episode, they raise the points of climate change and the political atmosphere, or something like that. So right out of the bat, I believe that is truly the only social commentary that they're putting in this episode, really. And again, I felt like the whole episode was really fictionalized here, so I'm sure that people, may want to discuss that part of it as well, but I think that it doesn't really matter a lot in the grand scheme of things in this episode, because that's just kind of a jumping off point for what they're doing here, and whether it's supposed to be based in our current times or in the future, I would tend to think it's the future, because a lot of the technology looks obviously, heightened. It doesn't look like this is realistic in our times, but anyways, so this mission not needed, but people are more confident in it now, and the first man mission to Mars, right? So, however, right before they take off, we get our first twist of things here. They get notice that North Korean nukes are on the way, and one is aimed right for their landing pad, right, along with Washington D.C. and all the big places, right, in the U.S. So, a pretty drastic plot point here. We're about 4 minutes into the episode, and it just comes out of nowhere. Not a very logical progression here. And to me, the rest of the episode I actually really enjoyed, but the first 4 or 5 minutes here seem really clunky and more like the other episodes that we've had so far in terms of writing, at least. So to me, it's like this kind of came out of nowhere. It's almost too much of a twist to give us here in this episode, but it does play a big part in the rest of it. So they're forced to hastily decide that they want to launch anyways to avoid the missile and keep the mission alive, and in doing so, possibly even keeping the human race alive, because they don't know what has happened back in the US. So they end up launching just in time before the missile strike comes, although they really have no evidence. They never see the missile obviously coming. They hear a voice talking from them from, air traffic control or whichever, right? The control room there. But that's the only proof that they have of the whole thing even happening. So there is definitely a question of why wouldn't they question this at all? And of course, later in the episode, that comes up. So I really like the way they did that. So they launch just in time, and they're off to Mars. So Jordan Peele comes in, individual madness or shared nightmare. The answer lies in their search for safe harbor here in the Twilight Zone. So I like that little intro bit. Again, problems with the writing here right off the bat, but again, I felt like it kind of settled in the rest of the episode, and I like that where Jordan Peele says individual madness or shared nightmare, and I feel like that's an ongoing theme of the entire episode and how this plays out. So, as the duration to arrival on Mars slowly counts down, and this is basically throughout the entire episode, maybe except for the last 5 minutes where they actually do arrive, it's basically this countdown to arrival and what these characters are going through throughout the episode. So we see the crew adjusting to each other and themselves, right, with the thought that they may very well be the last humans left due to the nuclear war breaking out back on Earth. And so they're prepared for a long journey, but they did not plan for this, right? They did not plan that. I believe in the episode they talk about how their families would have expected something bad to happen to them, but they would have never expected something to happen to their families and their families being gone. So really kind of reversing the tables here. And again, they prepared for this long journey, but not with the knowledge that Earth may just be gone, right? Be blown off, blown off the map, right? So even some doubt that the mission even has a point anymore if everyone else is already dead. And that also means that they will be stuck there on Mars once they eventually arrive. And then we get the line from the commander woman, who I didn't get her name. They just kept calling her commander in the episode. But anyways, I'm sure she did have a name, and I'm sure they used it at one point, but I totally forget. But anyways, so she says, I'm a commander of a slow suicide. So right off the bat here, it's setting in that these characters are essentially now on a pointless mission to Mars, although what else are they going to do, right? And that's the question that they are faced with, in the very beginning of this episode. So there you go. So where it gets interesting is about the 35-minute mark of this episode, which the rest of it goes a little slow, and that goes back to my kind of complaint again with this one. It's too long. Again, right? I think it's every episode, maybe episode 2, but even episode 2 was a little long with the 37-minute runtime that it had. Anyways, so we finally get to 88 days left, and as the group celebrates the commander's birthday, a huge revelation and a huge kind of twist comes up. So Jerry, who is the mission specialist, or I think he was made to be kind of the smartest guy on the crew, the most valuable, I guess, maybe next to the commander. But so Jerry proposes a hypothesis that he claims that he has proven beyond a reasonable doubt, which is that none of what they are going through is real, and that it is all an endurance simulation and an experiment meant to test crew morale and mental durability during a trip to Mars. So those are his words in the episode, and right off the bat, right off the bat, the crew kind of looks at him like he's, has 6 legs, or, just looking at him like he's crazy. Right, and right off the bat. So he then, keeps on going. He believes people are watching them and creating all of these situations, right? And even the situation of this solar flare that they suddenly get alerted by this Tina, right? Who's the, kind of the, artificial intelligence, I guess, the AI, or I guess you could call it that, right? We'll go with that, sure. But I guess the AI on the ship, who, basically alerts them and tells them when things are going on. So anyways, so this solar flare comes and he thinks that is just another, experiment with this test, right? It's all a test. It's not real. And he even says they never even took off. So after several minutes of him yelling and shouting about this theory, which again just makes him seem more and more crazy, the commander and the crew members decide, and they really have no choice, but they leave him outside of the cockpit, which they basically have to get in there in order to steer clear of the solar flare, which could kill them all. So if they're in the cockpit, they're secure, along with that kind of pothole cover on the window on the top of the ship. They're able to survive if they're in the cockpit, but otherwise they would be in real danger. So they get in the cockpit, right? And he decides then to go and open the latch with, that's airlock, right? Keeping them away from the solar flare. Of course, he opens this latch to basically open up to space, right? In order to prove his hypothesis. So he's pretty much, risking it all, saying this is all an experiment, it's all a simulation, and I'm going to prove it by opening this thing. This solar flare isn't real. And of course we see he was wrong. Now, it was not a simulation and he dies, or so we think, right? Obviously, I'm not going to quite get to the ending quite yet, but this was okay. So the twist at the end kind of makes up for this, but I would have liked to see this play through a little bit more instead of everyone thought he was crazy and their assumption was right. I would have liked them to play a little bit more at this and maybe build this in the earlier part of the episode too. Why did he only come to this realization right now, and why is it 35 minutes in? Why didn't we see him slowly, gradually? I think we saw one scene of him scraping the kind of toilet duct thing to prove that there was no crystallization, but that was it. So why didn't we get a little bit more setup here if this is the way they were going to pay it off? But anyways, so we see it was not a simulation. He opens it up to the solar flare, and supposedly he dies, although we never see it happen. So it turns out he had just gone insane, or at least that's the way the crew looks at it, right? So over the course of the mission, he, basically lost his mind, and he kind of went insane thinking that this was all a simulation and nothing was real. So I will say, though, an intense and suspenseful scene nonetheless. I actually thought this was a good scene, a scene that I was kind of getting chills because I was like, wow, that would be such a cool twist. Didn't even really think of that in the episode, and just really suspenseful to see if he was actually right. So I did like that scene, and I actually thought, or I actually bought into, what he was saying. I thought it was actually real. I thought it was going to be, that's the way that they were going to go, that it was all just a simulation. He'd open the door, and, everything would be fine. It wasn't actually a solar flare, and I thought it'd be a pretty cool twist, but they end up going with it, and so he dies. So we see the crew members emotional at his death, right? They lost one of their family members, as they say. They think of themselves as a family, right? And in a tough way, right? Because it appears as though he's kind of lost his mind. He went insane, and they couldn't really help him in that, and they had to leave him behind in order to survive. So again, back to Peel, right at the very beginning of the episode, he says individual madness or shared nightmare. This is an example of that individual madness, as he mentioned. And again, that's why I like that line at the very beginning, because then you also see the shared nightmare aspect of it because of his death. So because of this individual madness from this Jerry character, that kind of spawned the shared nightmare between these characters afterwards, which is what we see. So shortly after his death, the crew checks Jerry's theory, and it turns out he was wrong, right? So there is crystallization within the toilet duct, or at least the woman on there, again, I forget her name, but the woman finds it, right? she finds this crystallization in this toilet duct where we saw him before do the experiment, and there wasn't any. So again, and she didn't find any. So he really did kind of lose his mind. This is kind of our confirmation here that no, he was wrong. It's not all a simulation. This is very real, right? So the group kind of jokes about him watching them through the walls, right? And kind of jokes about this because now they have confirmed, or at least they think they've confirmed, that he was insane, right? This is all real. So then the woman though reminds them that he's really dead, right? Like we shouldn't joke about this. Like he actually is dead, and reminds them kind of these unfortunate circumstances around his death as well. And she says he's really dead, like so many other travelers who leave their home. I thought this was a nod back to episode 4, but maybe I'm just kind of reaching at straws here just by the word itself, traveler. But I thought this was an episode 4 callback. And then also you see her holding the Northern Gold Star plane, which of course is from the second episode. So all within that one line, I feel like there was at least 2 or 3 callbacks to the previous episodes. I didn't get any of episode 1 and episode 5. I haven't seen any connections yet so far in any of the episodes. I think except for the second episode where we see on the magazine stand that we see, Oliver's character from last episode. But anyways, if you really kind of watch closely, there are a lot of callbacks. But anyway, so she says he's dead like so many other travelers who leave their home, because she says home keeps us aware of who we are, and Jerry lost that. So, and I think that's an important line too that reminds us of, what this kind of, like I said, shared nightmare is for them about being away from home, right? And then she says, they may not have a home, but they have each other. So his death can bring them closer together if they choose to do that, right? If they choose to do that and make it like that. And so then she says, we are family. So possibly this is what keeps them alive in the remaining months, right? They decide to basically quash the shared nightmare of his death and decide it's going to bring them closer together rather than farther apart, which I believe connects to the main message of this whole episode, which is, unity in kind of in accomplishing a common goal, pretty much. And so I think that really connects back. So now let's get to the end of the episode where we get kind of everything just goes out the window and we get this massive twist. So arrival. They go through the motions, right? And also we skip time here, right? So from Jerry's death, we basically skip all the way to the arrival. So they go through the motions and successfully touch down on land after, I believe it was 280-ish days, possibly 300 even. So they finally touch down on land, and to check if they actually got to Mars or not, because they still, even if you, in this episode, or sorry, in this scene, they're still a little bit skeptical because, Jerry's hypothesis did seem like it had a little bit of reality in it. So they're still a little bit skeptical. They open the porthole, as they call it, or no, I think I referred to a porthole, right? To the cockpit and see the landscape of Mars with red dust and mountains everywhere. The commander says they made it through the great filter, and also Jerry died for nothing because it wasn't a simulation after all. They actually did make it to Mars, and Jerry, He died for nothing, right? It wasn't a simulation. He didn't prove anything. And as they believe, he truly did go insane. So anyways, a kind of a satisfying ending here, but then we get the big twist. And by the way, everything, the Mars landscape there and a bunch of the effects in this episode looked really great, by the way. Awesome. And that's never been a complaint about this show so far. Anyways, so everything seems to be good. That's just the way the end of the episode ends, until we zoom out from the cockpit so far that it seems we reach another dimension where we can see the group through videos flying in the air on some sort of a web. It almost looks like a spider's nest, almost, right? A spider's web with all these different videos playing in the background. And then, of course, we see Jerry wake up on the floor covered in slime. So, and it's just kind of a dark room, right? He's just there. He wakes up off the ground. I think he's completely naked, too. He wakes up off the ground, and he's watching these videos as they're playing. So, obviously, I think what this is supposed to be is basically an alien kind of different dimension, or maybe on their ship, perhaps. Something like that, right? And that's kind of what it's supposed to be. So then, a voice in a different language, and I feel like they stress this to make it as it was an alien instead of just another human that was watching them. So the voice says, they have exceeded our expectations and passed through the great filter, but it took the near destruction of their planet for them to finally do so. Their relationship remains strong, but they remain curious. This one even discovered we were watching. Impressive indeed. They are worthy of salvation. Prepare to make contact. So to me, what I got out of this is it was not a simulation, but It was not a human simulation, but these aliens were watching them and the rest of Earth the entire time through these like, web of videos, maybe even perhaps flying over and seeing what is going on. And basically, they were watching them the whole time to see if they could get to Mars, if they could actually break through this great filter, as they called in this episode, which seemed to be kind of a barrier, maybe physically, but also mentally as well for these humans. And so now they're going to make contact. So to me, make contact just means they're going to go meet the ship that's landed on their planet. And possibly Jerry will be reunited with them. So not a bad twist to end off the episode, right? Not bad. Kind of confusing though still. It left a little bit up for debate for sure. But it's not a human simulation. It's just that aliens have been watching them the entire time. And of course Jerry didn't die. So they perhaps rescued him within that solar flare when he opened that latch. But anyways, or there wasn't a solar flare. Maybe the aliens did that too. So again, really kind of open to debate for sure. Jordan Peele comes in at the end and he says, "It is said that seeing is believing, but the crew of the Bradbury Heavy mission to Mars might tell you otherwise. They are about to find out that they couldn't trust their own eyes, but who or what can we trust, if not ourselves? And the answer lies somewhere between takeoff and landing here in the Twilight Zone." So, an interesting line, right? And quickly to kind of analyze this, so he says seeing is believing, right? But the crew of the Bradbury mission might tell you otherwise. But to me, why would they tell you otherwise? It was more like Jerry would tell you otherwise because he saw that seeing wasn't believing, right? That what he was seeing was not necessarily real, and that the aliens were actually watching them. And so I don't know if that really makes a lot of sense with the twist that the whole crew would say that. I feel like just Jerry would say that seeing is not believing. And then also he says they're about to find out that they couldn't trust their own eyes. So that maybe applies to the rest of the crew, but again, not really Jerry. So maybe he is just talking about the remaining crew on that ship and what will happen. The ending also seemed a little bit unfinished. It almost seemed like this was like part one and then a part two was coming. But of course, we know it's an anthology. We're not going to see this story ever again. So it was interesting the way they ended it, where it seemed as though we're getting a part two, where he said, they don't know what's going to happen next and stuff like that. So it is interesting. And again, I love this, though, because it creates debate, creates discussion on what is going to happen to these characters next, and what does this ending actually mean. Alright, so in terms of a rating for this episode, I'm going to give this one a 4.3 out of 5. So to me, this was the first episode, I think we can all agree, this is the first episode without a big name in the cast. I know some people, might know these actors from other places and seen them in some other shows, and for sure, I'm definitely in that boat. I've seen, I think, 3 out of the 5 actors in other things, but anyways, I thought it was actually a good performances all the way around from this ensemble cast, and especially in an episode where you literally only have 5 people. You have 5 characters in this episode. Pretty sure that's all we see. If maybe you want to count the alien voice at the end or something, but so I thought this was actually pretty good acting from the entire the ensemble cast. And to be honest, it worked well without a big name. It really did. I was a little bit worried because I thought, well, you don't have this big actor to kind of carry the load again, but I actually felt like it was good. I mean, a couple of the actors I thought were a little bit better than others, but I thought it was all around a pretty good performance by the ensemble cast in this one. Still too long, this episode. It was just too long. Why, this twist happening about 35 minutes into the episode, it could have happened about 15 into the episode, so really kind of dragged this one along. But I will say the pacing was a little bit better because they kept going with this idea of these days passing with this duration countdown. So I feel like that actually helped the pacing a little bit, and kind of speeding it up at times where it got really, really slow. But yeah, overall, just too long again. It could have been about a 30-minute episode even this week, and it still would have been just as effective, I believe. So, yeah, and that's just been a problem with all the episodes, right? Direction and cinematography was great, as is in pretty much all of these episodes so far. I thought really great visuals. Everything just looks so great. And I really liked the direction in the one scene, where the one character is doing the workout, right, and pulling the cable back and forth, and she's kind of getting closer to the camera as it goes. And then also the other scene where Jerry's character, right, Jerry in the episode is looking in the mirror, and he's like wiping his face with a towel, but he's actually wiping the camera, and it covers up. That was a really cool shot there, and I actually really liked that. So yeah, the cinematography direction was really great in this episode. The dialogue also didn't seem as clunky or on the nose as some of the other episodes so far. I thought perhaps this was maybe one of the best dialogue writing episodes in that way. I mean, yeah, the plot, had its problems. The pacing, and the length was a little bit of an issue, but the actual dialogue of it, I thought was actually probably the best. Maybe the best out of all the episodes so far. Really, it made sense. It seemed like legitimate dialogue instead of some of these other lines so far where it just seemed really clunky and on the nose. So I thought that was good too. So again, just to recap my thoughts, an entertaining piece of sci-fi thriller, but not the Twilight Zone. This episode was not the Twilight Zone pretty much at all. I mean, even the message at the end is a little bit confusing. And again, maybe I'm missing an underlying tone or theme here of social commentary, but to me, this seemed like less social commentary, again, more just fiction, sci-fi thriller of an episode. And again, the message that I got out of it, right, was that humans can only unite and thus accomplish our goals over a common enemy or a common shared goal. And that's exactly what the crew did in this episode. So to me, that was the thing that I got out of it, that humans can only unite and accomplish our goals, right, over this shared goal or shared enemy in this case. Which was even, this madness setting in, but also what's there back on Earth, right? And going to Mars now. So that would be my take on it. But again, that was never really clear throughout the episode. So the ending twist didn't quite land for me, but I saw what they were trying to do with it, right? And one good thing is that we finally got some subtlety about the message and ending in this one. And again, I've been begging them to do this the whole way through. It's like all of this stuff has been on the nose, basically them just telling you exactly what they want to say with these episodes. And that's something the original did really well. Leaving a little subtlety, right? Leaving a little subtlety to you and making you think about it rather than, you just tuning in and them telling you exactly what they want you to think. I feel like this ending was just a lot better in that way. And I feel like more episodes should do that and kind of get you thinking about it rather, again, than, maybe even if you want to say preaching to you a little bit in some of these episodes as they've done. So anyways, again, yeah, my lesson, shared common goal or enemy unites humans and lets them accomplish things, like in this episode, getting past that great filter, as they say, and actually getting to Mars. So anyways, those are my overall thoughts. My favorite character to wrap things up here will be Jerry Pearson, played by Jefferson White, who is just in Yellowstone, and I believe he's going to be in Season 2 coming up. He also in House of Cards had a small role in that. Really, I think he's actually a really great actor, I will say. And now, obviously, by great actor, I mean, I think he's a great actor in kind of recurring roles. I thought he was actually pretty good in Yellowstone Season 1. And in this episode, I thought he gave the best performance. He also, to be fair, had the most dynamic character with kind of room to operate, if you will, within it. But I feel like he did a great job in this one. Like I said, though, a couple of other characters I have seen in other things, and they are good as well. But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting one to go with, and definitely, like I said, the most fleshed out character, I would say, in this episode would be Jerry Pearson. And yeah, I thought Jefferson White played him actually really, really well. I thought he gave a really great performance in this one. So anyways, guys, that'll just about do it for my review of The Twilight Zone this week. What did you think of this episode? I'd love to hear your thoughts of it. And also, what do you think of the ending? And what did you get out of this episode? Again, love to hear your thoughts of it. But anyways, that'll just about do it for me. Thank you so much for watching once again. Thank you so much for the support on these reviews and the channel. I can't thank you guys enough. I really appreciate that. But anyways, we'll see you next week for The Twilight Zone Season 1, Episode 7.